The Quran has 4 sections, not chapters, not the 30 parts your reciter counts through in Ramadan. 4 large structural divisions, each with a formal Arabic name, each covering a defined stretch of the book, documented in the classical sciences of the Quran for more than 1,000 years. And almost nobody learns them, which is strange when you think about it. This is not obscure material buried in an unpublished manuscript. It is in the standard classical works on the sciences of the Quran, the ones every serious student of the field works through. It was common knowledge among the first generations. And yet, you can spend a lifetime in mosques, complete a full recitation of the Quran many times over, and never once hear these 4 words said out loud. Ask a practicing Muslim how the Quran is divided, and you will hear about the 114 chapters. You will hear about the 30 Jews, the parts used for reading through the book in a month. Both of those are real, and both are useful. But underneath them sits an older architecture that most people are never taught at all, and it comes with 4 names. Az-Sab at-Tiwal, the 7 long, Al-Miyun, the hundreds, Al-Mathani, the repeated ones, Al-Mufassal, the frequently divided. 4 names, 4 sections, running in order from the front of the book to the very last page and dividing the entire Quran between them. This is not a modern theory, and it is not a diagram somebody invented to make the book look organized. These names come out of the earliest generations. They appear in the words of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself. They are how the companions talked about the Quran. They are how it was taught, assigned, and memorized for centuries before anyone printed a page number. And once you know them, the shape of the whole book snaps into focus, including something about its overall design that you will feel the moment we get to the end of this video. So we are going to walk all 4, in order, from the front of the Quran to the back, where each section starts, what is inside it, what the name actually means. And, because this channel does not tidy things up, the genuine disagreements the scholars had about the boundaries, of which there are several, and they are interesting. Let us start with why these divisions exist at all. Here is the key to understanding all of it. These divisions do not come from reading, they come from teaching. We are used to thinking about a book as an object you read silently, alone, with your eyes. But that is not how the Quran lived in the first generations. It lived on tongues, in memories, and in the assignments a teacher gave a student. And when your entire mode of transmission is oral, you need a vocabulary for portions. You need to be able to say, this week you take that stretch. You need names for sections, because you cannot point at a page number that does not exist yet. And that is exactly what these 4 names are. They are the vocabulary of a teaching culture. Consider the practical problem they were solving. There were no page numbers, because there were no printed pages. There were no chapter numbers in common use the way we use them. So you did not say chapter 54, you said Surah Al-Qamar, by name. And if you wanted to refer to a whole region of the book, a stretch containing dozens of chapters, you needed a word for it, not a number, a name. Something a teacher could say out loud to a student across a room, and the student would immediately know which part of the Quran was meant. That is what these 4 words did, and it is why they were in circulation from the earliest period. There is a narration recorded by Abu Dawud and by Imam Ahmad from a companion named Aus ibn Hudhaifa that captures this beautifully. He asked the companions of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, how they divided the Quran for their own recitation, how they portioned it out. And their answer was precise. They said they divided it into groups of 3 chapters, then 5, then 7, then 9, then 11, then 13, and then the portion of Al-Mufassal, from Qaf to the end of the book. Look at what you are being shown there. That is a memorization schedule. That is a rota, a working system used by living people to move through the entire Quran in an organized way, using named blocks. And notice that the last block in their list is one of our 4 sections, called by name, treated as a single known unit that needed no further explanation. Al-Mufassal. Everybody in that conversation knew what that meant. And the 4 names together appear in a narration from the companion Wathila ibn al-Aska, recorded in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and also by At-Tayalisi and by Al-Bayhaqi. Its chain has been graded as sound and reliable by the hadith specialists who examined it, including Sheikh Shuaib al-Arnaut, and a parallel version is narrated from Abu Umama in the Great Collection of At-Tabarani. In it, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, says that he was given, in place of the Torah, the 7 long ones, and in place of the Psalms, the hundreds, and in place of the Gospel, the repeated ones, and that he was favored, distinguished, given something extra with Al-Mufassal. Sit with the weight of that for a second, because it does 2 things at once. It names all 4 divisions in a single sentence, which is where the classical scholars got the framework. And it maps them onto the scriptures that came before. So the Quran is presented as containing what the Torah carried, and what the Psalms carried, and what the Gospel carried, and then one section beyond all of them, given as a distinction. Whatever else you take from this, the fourfold structure is not a librarian's invention. It is prophetic vocabulary, and the earliest Muslims used it as naturally as we use chapter numbers. From there, it passed into the standard reference works. You will find these 4 categories laid out and discussed in Al-Zarkashi's great manual on the sciences of the Quran, in Al-Suyuti's even more famous one, and in the later classical handbooks that students still work through today. This is settled, mainstream, thoroughly documented material. It simply never made the jump from the specialist literature into ordinary religious education, which is the only reason it feels like a secret. So let us walk them in order, front of the book to the back. The first section is As-Sab at-Tiwal, the 7 long. These are the 7 longest chapters of the Quran, sitting in a block right at the front, immediately after the short opening chapter, and they are enormous. Between them, they contain a very large share of the entire book. Anyone who has tried to read the Quran cover to cover knows the feeling of these 7, because this is where most people slow down. This is the dense, demanding, comprehensive material at the beginning. 6 of them are agreed upon by everybody. Al-Baqarah, the cow, the longest chapter in the Quran. Then Al-Imran, the family of Imran. Then An-Nisa, the women. Then Al-Ma'idah, the table spread. Then Al-An'am, the cattle. Then Al-Araf, the heights. And look at what is packed into those 6, because it explains why this block sits where it does. Al-Baqarah alone contains the verse of the throne, the change of the direction of prayer, the longest verse in the Quran on writing down a debt, the rules of fasting and pilgrimage, and the closing 2 verses, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said were given from a treasure beneath the throne. Al-Imran carries the family of Imran and the birth of Mary and the aftermath of the Battle of Uhud. An-Nisa lays out the law of inheritance in exact fractions, along with marriage, guardianship, and the treatment of orphans. Al-Ma'idah, among the last chapters revealed, contains the declaration that the religion has been perfected. And then Al-An'am and Al-Araf shift, register entirely, both revealed in Mecca, hammering on the oneness of God, the folly of idolatry, and the long line of prophets sent to peoples who refused them, with Al-Araf opening the story of Adam and the refusal of Iblis. So this section alone contains the creed, the law, the covenant, the prophetic history, and the community's hardest lessons. There is a report that whoever has taken the 7 long chapters has become a scholar. Whatever weight you give that particular narration, the point behind it is easy to see. Between them, these 7 hold a very large share of everything the Quran has to say. That is 6. And now we arrive at the first genuine dispute, and it is a good one. What is the 7th? There are 2 main answers, and the scholars have gone back and forth on them for centuries. The first answer is that the 7th is Surah Yunus, chapter 10, simply continuing down the list by length, clean, obvious, and held by serious scholars. But the second answer is more interesting, and it takes us to a piece of the Quran we have covered on this channel before. On this view, the 7th of the long chapters is not Yunus at all. It is Al-Anfal and At-Tawbah, chapters 8 and 9, counted together as a single unit. And there is a specific reason for that. At-Tawbah is the one chapter in the entire Quran that does not begin with the Basmala, the invocation in the name of God. It follows straight on from Al-Anfal with no separator at all. And because there's nothing dividing them on the page, one classical position treats the 2 as effectively a single long chapter, and that combined unit becomes the 7th of the 7. Now watch how these things interlock, because this is exactly why knowing the system matters. There is a famous exchange, preserved in the collections, where Ibn Abbas asks the Caliph Uthman ibn Affan directly about this, and listen to how he phrases the question. He asks, why Bara'ah, meaning at Tauba, which belongs with the hundreds, and al-Anfal, which belongs with the repeated ones, were placed together in the 7 long, with no basmala written between them. Do you hear what just happened? Ibn Abbas is not using our vocabulary. He is not saying chapter 8 and chapter 9. He is speaking in sections. He is saying, this one belongs to the Miyun category. That one belongs to the Mathani category. So why are they both sitting in the T-wall? The 4 divisions are not a later scholarly overlay imposed on the text. They are the working language of the companions themselves, precise enough to build a technical objection out of. And here is why that 7th chapter dispute is more than trivia. It does not only change the membership of the first section, it changes where the second section starts. If the 7th long chapter is Surah Yunus, then Yunus belongs to the 7 long, and the hundreds begin with the chapter after it. But if the 7th is Al-Anfal and At-Tawbah counted together, then Yunus is not in the first section at all, and it becomes the opening chapter of the hundreds instead. 1 disputed boundary, and 2 sections shift at once. That is what it looks like when you are dealing with a real structural system rather than a set of loose labels. The pieces are load-bearing. Move one and the next one moves with it. We have a full video on the 7 long on this channel, walking through what is actually inside them and why they sit where they do, and I will link it because they deserve their own treatment. For now, what matters is their function in the architecture. They are the foundation block. The longest, densest, most comprehensive material, front-loaded, right where a reader beginning a lifetime with this book will meet it first. The second section is Al-Miyun, the hundreds. The name is simply the plural of the Arabic word for 100, and it tells you exactly what qualifies. These are the chapters that run to around 100 verses, either at that mark or a little over or close to it. They pick up where the 7 long ones leave off and continue through the front to middle stretch of the book. The classical works list them out. Yunus, Hud, Yusuf, Al-Isra, also called Bani Israel, the children of Israel, Al-Kahf, the cave, Taha, Al-Anbiya, the prophets, Al-Hajj, the pilgrimage, Al-Qasas, the stories, and others in that same range. Now look at what is actually sitting in this section, because there is a character to it. This is where the great sustained narratives live. The complete story of Yusuf, told from beginning to end in a single chapter, which the Quran itself calls the most beautiful of stories. The people of the cave, and Moses with the mysterious teacher, and Dhul Qarnayn and the barrier, all inside Al-Kahf. Moses and Pharaoh at length in Taha and in Al-Qasas. The gallery of prophets, one after another, in Al-Anbiya. This is the storytelling heart of the Quran. Chapters long enough to hold a full narrative arc without becoming the sprawling legal and communal compendiums of the first section. If the 7 long are the foundation, the hundreds are the great sustained narratives built on top of it. And there is a reason 100 verses turns out to be roughly the right size for that. It is long enough to carry a story from beginning to end, with its characters and its reversals and its resolution intact, and short enough that a person can hold the whole shape of it in their head at once. Surah Yusuf is the clearest example there is. It is the only chapter in the Quran that tells a single story from start to finish without interruption. The brothers and the well, the caravan, the years in the house of the minister, the false accusation, the prison, the dream of the king, the rise to power, and the reunion where a wronged man tells the men who threw him away that there is no blame on them today. That entire arc, complete, in one chapter of this section. And notice, too, that this is where the chapters people are told to return to weekly and habitually begin to cluster. Al-Kahf sits here, the chapter recited every Friday across the Muslim world, holding 4 separate stories inside it. Al-Isra, which opens with the night journey, sits here. Taha, which the reports say was being recited in the house, where Umar ibn al-Khattab walked in intending violence and walked out a believer, sits here. The hundreds are where the Quran does its most sustained storytelling, and where a great deal of its most beloved material lives. And notice something happening to the shape of the book as we move. The chapters are getting shorter. Not dramatically, not yet, but steadily. Hold on to that, because by the end of this video, it is going to turn into the single most striking thing about the whole design. If this is giving you a map you did not have 20 minutes ago, let me ask you for one small thing, because on a channel like this, it genuinely matters. Take 1 second and tap the like button. It is a tiny action, but it is the clearest signal there is to hand this to the next person who has recited this book their whole life and has never once been told it has 4 named sections. And if you want to keep learning the architecture of the Quran rather than just its surface, subscribe and stay with us, because this is exactly what we do here. And tell me in the comments, honestly, how many of these 4 names had you heard before today? 0, 1, all 4? I read every reply. Now let us keep descending, because the next name is the most debated of the 4. The third section is Al-Mathani, the repeated ones, and this section is defined by falling below the 100-verse line, where the Mi'un are the chapters at or around 100 verses. The Mathani are the chapters that come in under it. They follow the hundreds and run onward through the middle stretch of the Quran, chapters like Al-Hijr, and the ones that sit around it in that region of the book. But the name is where this gets genuinely interesting, and it is the most debated name of the 4. Mathani comes from an Arabic root that carries the sense of doubling, folding, repeating, bending something back on itself. So why call an entire section of the Quran the repeated ones? The classical scholar Al-Zarkashi, in his great work on the sciences of the Quran, gives the most commonly cited explanation. He says they are called the Mathani because of the repeated accounts within them, the narratives and themes that recur, coming back around a second time. These are chapters that revisit, that return to stories and warnings and reminders already given, folding them back for a reader who has now traveled through the long foundational chapters and the great narratives and is ready to hear them again in a more concentrated form. And you can watch that compression happening if you read across this stretch of the Quran. The same prophets you met at length in the earlier sections come back through here in shorter, sharper passages. Noah and his people, Abraham and the idols, Moses and Pharaoh, Lot and Shu'aib, and the peoples of Ad and Thamud, appearing again and again, but now told in tighter form, several of them stacked inside a single chapter, one after another, hammering the same lesson from different angles. If the hundreds gave you the story at full length, the repeated ones give you the same material distilled, so that the pattern behind all those stories becomes impossible to miss. That is what folding does. You do not fold something to make it new. You fold it to make it fit, and to make it stronger, and to bring the two halves into contact with each other. But here is where the debate opens up, because that same word appears in the Quran itself, in a famous verse. In Surah Al-Hijr, God tells the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that he has given him 7 of the Mathani, and the mighty Quran, Sab al-Mathani, 7 of the repeated ones. So what are those 7? The most widespread view among the commentators, supported by an authentic narration, is that the 7 Mathani are the 7 verses of Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter, which is recited in every single unit of every single prayer, repeated more than any other passage in the entire book, folded back into the day, over and over, for a lifetime. But that is not the only classical position. Another view holds that the 7 Mathani are precisely the 7 long chapters we just walked through, the Sab at Tiwal. And that view, whatever you make of it, is what makes the naming of this third section so tangled, because it means the word Mathani is being used for the opening chapter, and for the first section, and for this third section, all in different places in the tradition. I am not going to resolve that for you, because the scholars did not resolve it either, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. What I will point out is what all of these uses have in common. Every single one of them is about something being repeated, folded, returned to. The Fatiha, repeated in prayer. The long chapters, repeated in the sense of foundational material, returned to constantly. The narratives repeated across the third section. The name is doing the same work everywhere it appears. It just gets attached to different stretches of the book, depending on which scholar you are reading. And the Quran uses the word about itself in one more place, which widens it further still. In Surah Az-Zumar, God describes the entire revelation as a book that is consistent within itself and calls it Mathani, not a section of it, the whole thing. So the word is applied to a single chapter at the front, to the first section, to this third section, and to the entire Quran, all within the same tradition. Which suggests the safest way to hold it is not as a label fighting over territory, but as a description of something the book does everywhere, at every scale. It folds, it returns, it comes back around. And the third section carries the name most formally, because that is where the folding is most concentrated. Which brings us to the last of the four, and the largest, and the one you already know better than any of the others, even though you have almost certainly never heard its name. The fourth section is Al-Mufassal, the frequently divided, and this is the one you know best, even if you have never heard the name, because this is the back of the book. It runs from somewhere in the 50s all the way to chapter 114, An-Nas, the final chapter of the Quran. It contains the overwhelming majority of the chapters that people memorize first. The short ones recited in daily prayers around the world. Start with the name, because the name explains itself once you see it. Mufassal comes from a root meaning to separate, to divide, to make distinct. And the reason this section carries that name is beautifully simple. Down here, the chapters are short, which means the separations between them come thick and fast. Chapter, separator, chapter, separator, again and again, page after page. Where the front of the book has enormous chapters running for many pages between divisions, the back of the book is divided constantly. It is the frequently divided section, and you can see why the moment you flip to it. Now, where does it begin? And here is our second real disagreement, and it is well known. The most widely held position, and the one used in that companion narration we opened with, is that Al-Mufassal begins at Surah Kaf, chapter 50, and runs from there to the end. That is the standard answer, and if you only remember one, remember that one. But other scholars place the boundary elsewhere. Some held it begins at Al-Hujurat, chapter 49, one chapter earlier. Others pushed it back considerably further, to As-Safat, chapter 37. And there are still other positions in the classical literature beyond those three. Why the spread? Because the boundary is not marked anywhere in the text. It is a scholarly judgment about where the character of the book changes, where the chapters become short enough and the separations frequent enough that a different kind of reading begins. Reasonable scholars, looking at the same pages, drew the line in slightly different places. That is what an honest tradition looks like when the evidence permits a range. And notice that the disagreement is not really about a fact anyone could look up. Everybody involved was reading the same book, in the same order, with the same chapters. What they were disagreeing about was where a gradual change becomes a definite one. It is the same problem you would face if someone asked you exactly which step of a staircase counts as the bottom. The descent is obvious. The precise line is a judgment call. So the classical scholars made the call in different places, recorded their reasoning, and preserved the disagreement rather than manufacturing a consensus that did not exist. And this fourth section is so large that the scholars did something they did not do with the other three. They divided it again, internally, into three. The first third is at Tywal al-Mufassal, the long Mufassal. These are the longer chapters, at the beginning of the section, running from wherever you place the start down through the region around Surah al-Buruj. The second third is al-Awsat, the middle Mufassal, running from around Surah at-Tariq through to Surah al-Bayyinah. And the final third is al-Khizar, the short Mufassal, running from Surah az-Zalzala all the way to An-Nas at the very end of the Quran. These are the shortest chapters in the entire book, some of them only 3 or 4 verses long, and this is the material that almost every Muslim child on earth memorizes first. Think about what is actually sitting in that final third, because it is the most recited material on the planet. Al-Ikhlas, 4 verses, which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said is equal to a third of the Quran. Al-Falaq and An-Nas, the 2 chapters of refuge, recited every night for protection. Al-Kawthar, the shortest chapter in the entire book, 3 verses. Al-Asr, the tiny chapter swearing by time itself, which the early Muslims are described as reciting to one another before parting company, because it says everything essential about a human life in a handful of words. Al-Ma'un, Al-Kafirun, Al-Fil, Quraysh. These are the chapters recited in prayers in every country on earth, by people who may know only a small portion of the Quran but who almost certainly know these. The largest, most memorized, most recited section of the Quran is the one at the very back, made of its smallest pieces. And these were not decorative labels either. They were practical. There are reports of the early Muslims matching these subsections to different prayers. Longer portions from the Mufassal for some prayers, shorter ones for others, using the internal thirds as a working guide for what to recite and when. That is the whole reason the subdivision exists. If you are leading a congregation, you need to know roughly how much to recite, and a section that runs from chapters of 40-odd verses down to chapters of 3 needs internal signposts, or the label becomes useless. So, the scholars gave the section its own internal map. Long portions for the prayers where a longer recitation is appropriate, medium for others, short for the rest. And that is precisely how a great deal of the Muslim world still recites today, whether or not the person leading the prayer could name the category they are drawing from. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is described in the authentic collections as reciting frequently from this section, and it is telling that the narration we opened with sets the Mufassal apart from the other three. The 7 long ones came in place of the Torah, the hundreds in place of the Psalms, the repeated ones in place of the Gospel, and then the Mufassal is described not as a replacement for anything, but as something extra, a distinction, a section with no counterpart in what came before. So there they are, all 4, Az-Sab at Tiwal, the 7 long, at the front, Al-Miyun, the hundreds, Al-Mathani, the repeated ones, and Al-Mufassal, the frequently divided, running all the way to the last page and divided internally into long, medium, and short. Now zoom out and look at what those 4 sections make when you put them side by side, because this is the payoff, and it is the thing nobody points out. The book narrows. Look at the movement. You begin in the 7 long, with the largest chapters in the entire Quran, hundreds of verses each, dense, comprehensive, demanding. Then you move into the hundreds, and the chapters step down to around 100 verses, long enough for a full sustained narrative. Then the repeated ones, dropping below 100, more concentrated. And then the frequently divided, shorter and shorter, until in the final stretch you are reading chapters of 5 verses, 4 verses, 3. From beginning to end, the book is tapering. It starts wide and it closes narrow. And that taper is not random. It is precisely what the 4 names are describing. Each section is a step down the staircase. And that is a genuinely unusual way to build a book. Almost everything we write builds the other direction. A story escalates toward its climax. An argument accumulates toward its conclusion. A course starts with the simple and works up to the demanding. We are trained to expect the weight at the end. The Quran does the reverse. It puts its heaviest, longest, most comprehensive material at the front, and then steadily lightens, chapter by chapter, section by section, until it closes with 3-verse chapters and a pair of short prayers for refuge. So what is the taper for? Consider what it means for the person actually carrying this book. The 4 sections are not just descending in length, they are descending in what they ask of you. The front demands sustained attention, a teacher, time, and study. The back asks only that you remember, and even a child can meet that, which means the Quran is arranged so that its most portable material is exactly the material a person is most likely to need most often. The verses you will say standing in prayer 5 times a day, the ones you will reach for in the dark, the ones you will teach your children before they can read, are the shortest and the last. And think about what happens to the reading experience as you descend it. At the front, the material is dense and comprehensive. The kind of thing you sit with and study, the law and the history and the long argument. At the back, the material is short, rhythmic, and burning, with the foundations, the oneness of God, the day of judgment, the shortness of this life, compressed into a few lines you can hold in your chest forever. Which means the Quran gets more memorizable as it goes. The front is built to be studied, the back is built to be carried. And that is why the last section is the one every child learns first, and the one recited most in prayer across the whole world. It is not an accident that people start at the back. The back was shaped for it. And there is one more thing that follows from all of this, and it is the real reason these names still matter. The 4 sections were the working language of a community that carried this entire book without a single printed copy. They needed names for portions because they were assigning portions, memorizing portions, reciting portions in prayer, and reviewing portions with teachers. The divisions are the fingerprints of a book that was carried in human beings before it was ever carried in ink. And knowing them changes something practical for you, not just conceptually. It gives you a way to locate yourself. When you open the Quran now, you can ask which section you are standing in, and that single question tells you what kind of reading is appropriate. In the 7 long, slow down, because this material is dense and rewards study. In the hundreds, follow the story, because these chapters are built as sustained narratives. In the repeated ones, watch for the patterns returning in compressed form. And in the frequently divided, especially its final third, memorize, because that material was shaped to be carried. 4 sections, 4 different ways of reading, and the book itself is telling you which one it wants. So the next time you open the Quran, do not only see 114 chapters, and do not only see 30 parts, see the 4. See the 7 great foundations at the front, then the narratives, then the concentrated repetitions, then the long taper of the frequently divided all the way down to the final short prayers for refuge. See a book that begins wide and deliberately narrows, until what is left in your hands is small enough to carry everywhere for the rest of your life.